Stephen, I'm going to move on to you. So this is a really important kind of part of this narrative that we're creating on this stage is that, you're coming in with a very different perspective than the rest of us. You're bringing in the policy change perspective. And obviously a lot of people are making films with that in mind, that they want, that sort of tangible goal to actually affect change and to, move the needle on actual policy change.
Right.
And so I'm curious just to hear from you, it's hard to do right now, a very polarized system, would you say?
Yeah.
I feel we're in that climate right now. And many of us have probably experienced this. A lot of times when you're involved in a story about anything having to do with the environment or climate change, it becomes political for some reason. Would you all say? I mean, it just, we get that label right away. What can you tell us about that false narrative? I want you to just kick this down right now.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm honored to be here, and a big thank you to Jill and the Redford Center for not only hosting this, but through all of those films, raising the environmental consciousness of our country and beyond, which has a huge impact in our ability to achieve policy change. So thank you so much for that. And great to be with everyone here. This is my first Sundance, and I did get the memo. You should wear boots on a panel. So I got that. Thanks for the heads up on that. But in answering that question, I also want to add to something very important that Brian mentioned, which is the power of reframing a narrative from despair to hope. So I've worked over my career in roughly 3 spaces. One is environmental advocacy, and then realizing that our democracy is on the brink, working in political reform, and now in entertainment. And in that middle chapter, I founded and led an organization called Millennial Action Project, which has grown to be the nation's largest organization of young legislators in the country, working at the congressional and state level. And climate change, thank you. Climate change was the driving force of founding that organization, because when I was coming out of college, I was asking this question, which was, how is it that the decisions that are being made about the future of our climate are not being made by the ones who will inherit that future? And on top of that, I realized that the question of whether or not we solve the issue of climate change and so many of these environmental crises really is a proxy for whether or not our democracy can function, whether or not our democracy can come together across all of our lines of difference, the most differences ever in any kind of society in human history, and solve these challenges. And so that was the driving force behind this. And as we worked on climate, many of my dreams came true when I first envisioned these dreams when I was in college, that we can actually bring people together to create tangible change. And one of the biggest differences we saw to create more traction is exactly what the question is suggesting about whether or not it's political, and what Brian was saying, which is ultimately, and we actually partnered with a great organization called the Frameworks Institute, which looked at how you frame issues and how that impacts whether or not people resonate with it. And here's what we found. If you frame an issue in terms of how you can take concrete steps to build a more positive future, you're going to see a lot more uptake, because people feel like there's something that you can do. You feel that agency. On the flip side, if you frame the issue as just 10-alarm fire, it can lead to a lot of paralysis. And in fact, we saw some negative uptake on the issue. So this whole idea, our organization was just rebranded as Future Caucus, because it is all about how we can take steps together as a society to create a better future. I've recently stepped into entertainment, and I lead an organization now called Bridge Entertainment Labs, which is all about bringing that bridge-building ethos to transform America's divisions and create new stories of us, harnessing the power of entertainment media, and that's both TV and film. And the reason why climate change is such a powerful issue in that context is because at the end of the day, it's a human issue. As Jill mentioned, this really should be the most unifying issue that we take on. Of course, it affects some communities more than others, but at the end of the day, storytelling has such a unique ability to connect with us at the heart level and connect that hopefully with concrete actions that we can take. So that's one reason I'm really, really grateful to be here to kind of to talk about that. Now, as we've done this work over the last 15 years and have successfully brought left and right together, Democrats and Republicans together to pass clean energy funding, a lot of opportunity we're seeing at the state level, we saw something interesting, and that's a huge opportunity for this room, which is there's a saying in Congress that everyone you'll meet will fit into one of two categories, people who want to do something and people who want to be something. Mm-hmm. There are people who want to be show horses, and there are people who want to be workhorses. And naturally, you can guess which people are getting all the oxygen right now, right? Which people are getting stories told about them and their style of politics. And so if we want to get back to the environment and climate change as a human issue, as a hopeful issue that we can take concrete steps about, we need to start telling more stories about the workhorses. A lot of members of Congress and state legislators who you will never hear of because they don't get those stories told. That's what I think needs to change. Tell more stories about people who want to do something and not just be something. There have been some positive storytelling moments over the last few years. In 2018, there was a documentary called Paris to Pittsburgh, which did interview a number of people in this sort of climate solutions and bridge building space, but I still think there's a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm just hearing, even in that response, what's at stake if this climate messaging continues to be polarizing. And, you know, there's a lot of conversation about who owns this issue. At least I've encountered that in my experience, and, you know, to whom does it actually really matter? So now, bringing it back to just the filmmaking as a tool, can you talk about just how storytelling is going to be the answer to this?
I've always believed since I was a little kid and I, you know, first picked up the guitar and I was dreaming of being in rock bands, and I still play, by the way. You know, this idea that if you can see it, you can believe it. And if you can believe it, then you can do it. And that's the power of storytelling. I think that right now, we have a huge challenge, first of all, to believe that we can bridge the divides that need to be bridged in order to move this agenda. Let me ask a question for everyone here. How many of you have faced a challenge in bridging a political divide in your friend circles or in your own family? Okay, almost everyone. So this itself is a challenge because I'm sure many of you have had the experience of feeling that despair of, can I even have a conversation with that person? Can I even be in a room with that person? Is it really possible? There's a lot of fear that has to be overcome. And so we were a part of a great documentary film called The Reunited States, which was initially aired on PBS, now is on Amazon Prime, which tells the stories of political bridge builders and that hard work, often fear-inducing work, to bridge those political divides and create real change. So that's the first step. Then the second step related to climate and the environment is to believe that real change is possible. And again, that gets back to the stories about really doing something. And I think that documentaries in particular have a platform much more than the news media does, because I've done a lot of political commentary on all the major networks from CNN to NBC, et cetera. And I've seen how that model works behind the scenes. And it's all super immediate, in your face, and really the business model is how can we scare you into watching so, you know, we can do well by our advertisers. I think the power of documentary storytelling is to go much more in depth about a human story of someone who's made a difference, very much like you were mentioning, Daphne. And so I think we need a lot more of that. And then the final piece is to believe that our democracy can function once you bring that energy, like once you raise the consciousness, can we channel that into an honest and a more honest political system with some integrity? And that's, I think, the third piece. So all three of those can be hugely impacted by the power of storytelling.
That's fantastic. And, you know, I look at this as, I explain this a lot, especially working with a lot of financiers. to me, the way I frame it is, documentary is, the differentiator is that this is not meant to be a one-off experience for people. Not that narratives are, but like when you watch a documentary, most of the time, the intent is that like you'll do something afterwards, right? You know, like you learn an issue, and you hear about all these films that 10 years later, people are still talking, they're still screening, they're still acting on what they learned and what they absorbed. And so that's also, that's the pitch too. Like, why does this matter? How do you generate this support? It's because you tell people like, this is how you give long-term life to these issues. And so it's important.
And just to add to that, it's documentary films and certainly also feature-length narrative unscripted films as well. On a parallel issue that we worked a lot on, there was a film with Michael B. Jordan called Just Mercy that came out a few years ago. And that's about the real-life story of Brian Stevenson and getting innocent people off death row. And so we partnered with them on the Impact campaign, and were able to use the film as a convening force to bring together legislators, learn about the film in a way that's also entertaining too. And we were able to turn that into over 30 bipartisan bills that passed in state legislatures across the country.
Wow.
And so there's so much potential there with documentaries and scripted films because it's a convener. And what the research shows is that when you tune in, you kind of let your guard down. You're willing to imagine a different future. You're willing to challenge maybe some of the conventional narratives. And I don't know if you feel the same way, I just haven't experienced that in any other medium than this.
Yeah. And I think when I think about the word entertaining in this context, I interpret that to mean memorable. I mean, like, it's okay for you to enjoy the film that you watch and actually be inspired by it and actually be moved to act on it. I think we need to reclaim that definition, frankly, because I think this is how we draw in a bigger audience and just get people to understand, you know, why we're doing what we're doing. So we're going to open this up to audience Q&A in a moment, but I wanted to just pose another question to all of you at this point, just to kind of get your collective perspective. Can you talk about just what role we have collectively? We've touched on it a bit in each of the narratives that you've presented, but we all have a part to play in kind of reshaping this climate narrative. And we've been treated today to a wide range of perspectives on that, which is another thing that's very important. It's just these individual perspectives that help drive forward real, honest conversations about climate justice. But I'd love to open it up to all of you to kind of weigh in on just what collective role we play and all the different roles that we play, the hats that we wear. How do we actually come together to drive forward this change?
I had a mentor who once said something that was dangerous in a good way, which was, if you think someone ought to do something, that person's probably you. And in the space of organizing and movement building, there are so many great organizations out there, and happy to chat afterwards about how to get plugged in with them. But my one push there is to approach it with the spirit of love and bridge building. And you can break down oppressive systems with a spirit of love and reinvent them so they're more inclusive. And I think that's needed now more than ever. And I think on the entertainment side, so many collaborations possible there. The three things that we might be able to collaborate on with Bridge Entertainment Labs is one, we convene conferences and roundtables to introduce the conversation about bridge building and entertainment. The second is we consult directly with creatives and filmmakers. So if you're working on a project and you're wondering how can we appeal more across our lines of difference, that's something we want to be able to help you with and partner on. And certainly the last piece is producing new films and new content where we're able to help as a financer, as a funder, as well as creatively as well. And so there are lots of opportunities across the board. And I reflect on when I grew up in Wisconsin, and my parents are immigrants from India. And so when they came to this country, they said, we would be so proud if our son went into environmental activism, politics, and entertainment. Like that would be, no, of course not. That was not the case at all. No, they, no. So, the idea though of, really stepping outside of your comfort zone is something I've come to embrace. And sometimes you don't know what the playbook is. And I sometimes feel like I've become a glutton for punishment in terms of trying to create these new spaces and new conversations. But at the end of the day, I think that discomfort is where the transformation happens. And I think, just to tie it back to the intro video we saw, the idea of artists and nature fitting together, I think artists have always had this proud tradition in American history of making people feel uncomfortable, of forcing us to confront those hard truths, and allowing us to reimagine our future together. That's really, I think, why, let's embrace that idea. And so, just to requote my mentor, if you think someone ought to do something, that person's probably you.
It's incredible. Thank you for that.
I worked at Sundance forever, and it's an amazing platform to launch a film, but it's also a platform that you can lose a film. A film can get lost in all the hubbub of Sundance and not get the press it needs. And just like Brian was saying about Netflix, like you can't find it necessarily. So I think it's really important what Brian said, like it might not be, like think about what's your impact, what's your audience. So my question is, getting brands' attention with a film that's about impact that might not have a zillion eyeballs yet. How do you get those brands' attention? Because for them, it's about eyeballs, right? Like it's about money and so that's just, I think that dichotomy is interesting.
Yeah, I think when you're raising money from anyone, not just brands, you've got to make your project feel inevitable. Like it's going to happen and you've got to be part of it. This train's leaving the station and you need to be part of it. And so all the coalitions you can build and the nonprofits you can get involved with it, and having, tons of followers on social media, whatever it is, makes them feel like we need to be part of this too. I mean, the secret is a lot of foundations that you see their logos on these films, they just want to make sure they're part of that campaign too. Like it's, it's really about their esteem factor as much as anything. And most brands that are financing film these days, they're not doing it to sell product. I mean, I'm up at a conference right now and our topic is you can't prove that you can sell Rice Krispies by making a movie. You can't show that connection. They're doing it to showcase their values. And so you want to make sure you're showing how that overlaps with their values. And believe it or not, brands do have values, some of them. And so you want to show how that's going to help them show their customers what they care about, and also their employees. Like we've got clients that the only reason they're doing a film is so their employees can feel better about working there. So if you can connect it to that aspect, that can help you when getting in that conversation.
I was just going to make a similar point. Like for brands, connecting to purpose, to culture, has a huge impact on the bottom line in exactly that way. It's being able to attract this younger workforce. Young people overwhelmingly are choosing where they work based on purpose and values of that brand. And one of the best ways to communicate that is through culture and through storytelling. I think the key is that it also needs to be authentic as well, which I think ties back to the first question about social media. In whatever content that comes out and all of the spin-off pieces of content on social media, it's got to be authentic, and hopefully that can counteract some of the AI dynamics that you were mentioning as well.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, Redford Center.
And thank you all.